recording.
Yeah. Thanks all.
There we go. All right.
I assume it's recording to your computer or maybe mine, but we'll figure it out, I guess, at the end.
It's actually to my account, so we're good.
Okay, great.
And that disembodied voice is Sarah, my wife, and the co-founder of the Divine Assembly, which we affectionately call ourselves the Divine Disassembly. So this start is appropriate to who we are. It's very on brand. So, okay, let me start out with a question for you. At least at one point, you said that this question defined your work. Can you have a Jewish experience with psychedelics?
In short, I'll say yes. In long, I'll say that, psychedelics really magnify whatever is already happening, right? So you might know about the term set and setting, which refers to your like mental state going into a psychedelic experience, as well as the context surrounding it. And so what I've found is that for people coming from any sort of religious orientation, where religion plays a really big role in their lives or identities, or at least has in the past, psychedelics might exemplify that, religion might come to play in a psychedelic journey, especially when you're kind of going beneath the surface of your regular reality. So absolutely, you can have a psychedelic or a Jewish or religious experience with psychedelics. And, I'll also say that it kind of transcends religion in a lot of ways. And you kind of might just have an experience of God or the divine or whatever you want to call it.
Perfect. You and I have a common frenemy, anxiety. And you once said, I never felt so innately Jewish as when I did 5-MeO DMT. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So 5-MeO, for people who don't know, is a form of DMT that comes from the Sonoran desert toad. And it's like this like secreted venom. You could also make it synthetically. So there's some controversy around how people should get it, but it's a very, very, very intense dissociative psychedelic, more intense than regular DMT. And it's called the God molecule. And you're not there. You're like, you disappear and you're kind of left with just like soul or body or this kind of dissociated combination of the two, but your ego holding it all together is not there. And so when I was under the influence of 5-MeO, it's a very short trip. You kind of blast off within 20 minutes and you're back again. I kept talking the entire time, like, am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay? And like my nervous system could just not relax. And especially with my ego kind of dissolved, it was this thing where it's like, oh, like, what's the pace of my nervous system? What's the pace of my heart? Like, how does my body just like know how to react kind of on a genetic level? And I was with these two guides, not Jewish, really, really sweet professional people. But I just had all this anxiety that I felt that I couldn't really, sorry, there's a few kids in the background. I was kind of like tapping into this anxiety that I think belongs to me, but really was asking a question that is like not just my own question. And I think when I said, I think I was speaking more from like an ethnic point of view than a religious point of view, if that makes sense. So like there's a lot of trauma, like inherited trauma that comes along with being Jewish, and being from a lineage of people who've never really been safe where they live. In Europe, we were always kind of like on the run, Holocaust and then pogroms and so forth. And so I think really the question of am I okay is, am I safe? And that is like a very inherently Jewish issue, is because there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the world and feelings of unsafety, and how that kind of permeates our consciousness on a cellular level. So that's kind of what I meant by it. But also then realizing, like, even when you're not okay, and when you like you ask, am I okay? Am I okay? Am I safe? Really, the next question is, and you kind of back yourself into a corner, is like, you're always in the hands of God. And so, for me, that's a Jewish concept or understanding of God, but really like at the end of the day, when you feel like you're dying, like, people at those points in their lives turn to religion or turn to some sort of like higher power. And so in the event of ego death and an intense psychedelic experience, it kind of forces you into that position a little bit.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, 5-MeO is the only psychedelic that has ever scared me. And like you said, it's pretty short duration, 10 to 20, 25 minutes or so. And I had this feeling that I had never had before in my life. And new feelings can be scary. And so I thought, oh my gosh, no one can have this feeling for 10 or 20 minutes. I'm going to die. And so really panicked, really got scared. And, I learned later, people call this feeling peace, bliss. I mean, I'd never felt it before in my life. And so, that's kind of a fun thing for me, is that has helped me gauge, okay, this is what peace feels like. And am I feeling that or not? Should I do something different in this situation?
I have that sometimes when I've had it on MDMA, for example, or other psychedelics, where I actually do come into this mode of bliss and peace. And then like that Jewish neurosis in me is like, wait, are you sure something's not wrong? And like, I go into this spiral and I realize it's like, that's like my mother and that's my grandmother. And that's just generations of neurosis and fear. And like, just like having to stay vigilant and on alert. That's what inherited trauma is really.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. And I'm glad you answered the first question affirmatively, that you can have a Jewish experience with psychedelics. This would have been very awkward Zoom if you had answered that one negative. So this apparently is just going to be a bunch of Madison quotes that you can respond to. So you said, for myself and for others in the community. You know what? Let's define the community. What are you helping report on and now you have become a part of in the Jewish community with psychedelics?
Yeah, so I've reported on psychedelics, cannabis, and Jewish culture all separately, among other topics like technology and agriculture. But I started finding that, backtracking is when I was in journalism school, every kid in the class had to do like an ethnic community. So the Russians, the Puerto Ricans, whoever, the Indians, because I was the only Jew in the class, or one of two Jews. They said, okay, you're going to do the Hasidic community in Brooklyn. And, they thought I would have access to like the world's most insular religious community, as a non-Hasidic Jew. So I tried and tried and tried. But I met these kids who were sort of like, the term is off the derech, or off the path, who were like sort of, gone a little bit deviated from the religious, whatever, orthodoxy. And they were doing all these like psychedelics at festivals and, doing ayahuasca and stuff like that. And I that's where it really came to me. That question is like, how is Judaism not factoring into their experience? So to answer the question, like, what do I write about? I write about the intersection of psychedelic consciousness, where that overlaps with religious experience, consciousness of the divine, or like, how does one experience God? Is the experience of God psychedelic by itself? Can you have an experience of God that is true and real under the influence of a psychedelic substance? How can you incorporate religious practice into psychedelic use, or ritual into psychedelic ceremony? And how does that help people really reconcile religious informed trauma, and identity and spiritual sustenance? So that's really what drives me. And I just wrote a book about all of that, coming from the perspective of also, I grew up in like a sort of hippie Jewish community. My dad is old friends with Ram Dass, who was a psychedelic researcher at Harvard with Timothy Leary in the 60s, and they got kicked out. And Richard Alpert, his name was, he was a Jewish kid from Boston, ends up in India under a guru, and learned from the guru and wrote a book called Be Here Now. And so that was his sort of like deviation from Judaism toward another religious path. question is like, why go and be something you're not? Or, you know, something that you're not born into. And so that really also informs a lot of my questions and, you know, my perspective when I report on all of this stuff.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to ask you to explain what OTD, off the path, go into that in a little more detail, and I'll give you the why. You and I discussed this. I loved our call before this. A lot of folks on this call are lapsed Mormons. And so I think perhaps there are a few parallels between, you know, some folks here who have, you know, no longer are active in the Mormon faith. You know, maybe they've had their Mormonspringer or still on it. So yeah, please talk about OTD, if you will.
Yeah, so you know, in some cases, I think it could be a pejorative term. I mean, it's used very widely, but like, what does that mean? Like off the path, like there's only one path, you know? And I've heard some people take it back, OTD, on the derech, or on the path, like who's to say what the O stands for, or on my path or whatever. So generally the term refers to people who grew up Orthodox, specifically, you know, Hasidic, and are no longer practicing in the way that they were raised. So they might still be observantly Jewish, you know, according to like whatever way of doing that makes sense to them or feels right to them. But according to like the community that they come from, you know, that would be considered still OTD. And like I said, I think it's really like, a really cool opportunity to own, you know, what your own relationship is to God and religion and yourself. So does that answer the question? Or
It does, absolutely. So the follow-up question to that is, you wrote, for myself and for others in the community, I've found that integrating a psychedelic into Jewish practice has helped give new depth and connection, transcendence, and ecstasy to the religious practice. Can you elaborate on that? How so?
yeah, so what I'm seeing now is that a lot of people from Orthodox world are doing psychedelics, and that doesn't mean that they're going OTD. In fact, a lot of the people who are having these experiences, you know, in ceremonial Jewish, you know, plant medicine settings are maintaining their faith and practice, and actually doing it with like more, with more, it's enhanced, like they're actually more into it and it has more life than it did before that. Because what psychedelics do, at least in my experience, is they're kind of a lubricant for prayer, and you get to experience God on an embodied level. And so when you're going through the motions, and especially if you're Orthodox, there are a lot of motions to go through. You know, it's like the why and the meaning behind it sometimes just gets lost, like the form becomes greater than the substance. So when I said that, you know, I meant it in regard to that aspect of things, as well as that people coming from whatever type of religious background they're coming from, be it an Orthodox background or a secular background, where they have some sort of mystical or divine experience with a psychedelic, and then they're looking to integrate that, and they turn to the religion that they're familiar with, and they all of a sudden, there's a story actually where Ram Dass, Richard Alpert, that psychedelic researcher who wrote Be Here Now, was in Jerusalem, and you know, he was like a Jewish guy but looked like a Indian Baba, pretty much, like with robes and long hair and all of this stuff. And these two black hat Hasidic kids came up to him when they saw him crossing a square in Jerusalem, and they're like, Ram Dass, it's you. Like, we read Be Here Now and we got really into acid, and then we became religious. And they were in Hebrew, the term is Bal Tshuva. It means like master of return. It's a kind of a term for like born again Jews who rediscover religiosity and become Orthodox, coming from a more secular place. And so you hear a lot of stories like that too, actually, where it's like either, you know, people are becoming more religious or practicing to a greater degree because they had this experience with psychedelics, and now they need to like harness that experience into like a mundane container that has practices and rituals that will enable them to bring it down and feel it in their everyday life.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because that is the rest of your quote. If you could speak to your personal practice on that. So you talk about it helping you access depth in your religion. And then you also say that it happens in a way that you could consequently harness without the drugs for months or years to come. Only here and there do I need to dip back in to remember.
Which article is this from?
I don't know. I've read many of your great articles. Do you not recall that? Do you
No, I
disagree?
do. I do recall writing that, but now I can't remember which article it's actually in. Probably the tablet story from about your psychedelic summit. But okay, so I'll tell you what I mean. Is I had the experience of doing ayahuasca or other plant like MDMA even, or mushrooms, but I've had the experience of doing it specifically on Shabbat or the Sabbath. And I grew up in it, like I said, like a sort of hippie household. We weren't that observant. Like both my parents are very God oriented, but we're not like strict or anything like that. And so our Sabbath observance was like very minimal, have dinner, light candles, go watch TV and do whatever. And I was in New York, and I started reporting on and hanging out with people who were coming from Orthodox backgrounds. And so the way that they interacted with Shabbat was different than what I had done, that it meant something different to them. And so doing a psychedelic on Shabbos really kind of like infused it in such a way that like in the Shabbats to follow, it was like, okay, like now I had sort of like, it had been kissed with the psychedelic and it became the integration. So the following week, I was like, oh, like what, like I when I was under the influence of the psychedelic, I was like feeling into the energy of Shabbat. And, I don't know how the Sabbath is sort of like cross-religiously described, but in Judaism, it's said that like, it's really the time for the Shekhinah, or the divine feminine aspect of God. And so it's like a very nurturing time. It's also like the idea that like you're not really in mundane time, but you're in this sort of like container of the infinite. Like you have a taste of like the world to come, of like the highest realm. There's like, kind of different realms of reality according to Kabbalah. And like Shabbos is like you're tasting the infinite, you're tasting the divine. There is no time. You're like wrapped in a blanket of the Shekhinah, of the divine feminine. And under psychedelic, I was like really feeling that. And there's other aspects of it too. Like I often say that Shabbos is the set and the setting, because the setting is obvious, right? You have wine, you have nice food, you dress well, you sing certain songs. And the mental state is like, you're not allowed to work, right? But it's really like, okay, I'm not even going to think about work, or I'm not even going to think about money. Or if God forbid you find out someone dies on Shabbos, like you can't even start mourning until Shabbat is over. So that's the kind of mental diligence that you really tap into. And again, doing that with a psychedelic helped me kind of learn it, so that afterward, I didn't need the psychedelic to feel the same energy.
Okay, perfect. Do you think that the psychedelic to some degree was training wheels? It taught your mind that you can get there, so your mind looks for it?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you hear about people who, break addictions through psychedelics or come out of a depression. And again, it's not a magic bullet. So don't think like I'm going to do mushrooms and I'm going to be done with cigarettes tomorrow. But like, it is the kind of thing where like when you're in this malleable place, your brain, your body, your somatic and mental systems are kind of in a state of reprogramming, or at least open to it. And it's, it doesn't have to be just like Shabbos is like an interesting because it's not a thing, right? It's a day, it's a time. But other practices that I would encourage is like, if there's a certain prayer that you like, do it when you're tripping. And then when you're not tripping, like that becomes your integration and it will take you back. Listen to the same music like, trip with one song, whether it's live or recorded or whatever. And when you're not tripping or journeying or whatever, to listen to the same music and it will take you back. And that's really what it is about, like return, like keeping that medicine psychedelic experience alive.
Perfect. Love it. So, yeah, Ram Dass and others, they really, I think, a lot of people might want to say that they birthed kind of a Jewish psychedelic tradition. Someone asked in the questions, what are there psychedelic origins for Judaism? And I know you have written about this.
Yeah. So there's a lot. So first of all, there's a really great book called Magic of the Ordinary, rediscovering or uncovering the shamanism and Jewish shamanism, pretty much. And it looks at the kind of religion before it was officially a religion, like just sort of the indigenous tribal aspects of Judaism that were very earth-based. So, there's attention to like the winds and the elements and the four directions and up and down and spirit animals and all this stuff. Someone asked me to type out the book, Magic of the Ordinary by Gershon Winkler. It's in the chat. So that
those are scary fast typing skills. I'm frightened from a distance.
I have magic hands. I don't know. I type for a living. What can I do? So pretty much if you think about like, today when we think about like psychedelic religions, quote unquote, we think about indigenous peoples, right? Like Native American Indians have peyote. In South America, they have ayahuasca, it goes in Mexico, they use mushrooms, whatever. And like the point I'm making is I think the roots of any religion, like the roots of any peoples, any indigenous peoples who have a relationship with the land and a relationship with plants and a relationship with the way the stars move, the stars in the sky and the way the sun and the moon are moving, like that is all psychedelic, right? Like what do psychedelics do if not like put you in touch with nature and your essence and like the essence of the universe entirely? So that's number one, is like forget like, oh, did this plant have psychedelic attributes? It's like what they were living a psychedelic infused life just by virtue of it, and that was before the receiving of the Torah. Now more specifically, the Egyptians knew how to knew acacia extraction technology, and acacia is a shrub that is native to the Middle East that contains DMT. And when the Jews were slaves in Egypt, so to speak, or as the story goes, right, they learned acacia extraction technology from the Egyptians, and that was like kind of one of the things that they took with them. And they're wandering the desert, acacias around. You have stories of the burning bush. So for instance, it is likely that there might have, acacia might have been part of the equation. Going forward from that, take the burning bush story and forget whether or not there was acacia involved. Like Moses was having a psychedelic experience, right? Like I think prophecy in general.
In the mystic.
What was that?
He was in the mystic.
1,000%. And Rick Strassman, who's a DMT researcher, has actually looked at the similar brain states between DMT and that of prophecy. So prophetic experience is psychedelic. So Moses was having this experience and then receives Torah, and at the bottom of Mount Sinai, the rest of the tribe is having, I think that as the Torah states, like they're seeing the sounds and hearing the colors, or they're having a synesthesiastic experience. And so the receiving of Torah at Mount Sinai is really like one of like collective psychedelic revelation. And like that, in Judaism we celebrate it as the holiday of Shavuot, is celebrates that, right? Like, and I think it's so fitting that the thing that forms the religion, right, like the Bible, Torah, like the 10 Commandments, is really like what's the word, like you can't separate it from the psychedelic aspect of that story for Moses and the rest of the tribe. So that's just another example, and there's plenty others in the development of the Hasidic movement. The Baal Shem Tov, or the kind of the father of Hasidic Judaism in Europe, was known to be a medicine man. He would like go into the forests and like, you know, he was an herbalist and he would do these healings on people, and he was known to smoke from an enchanted pipe, and he would say a bracha or a prayer, a blessing over the pipe before he even smoked it. And there's all sorts of like legend and lore around that, plus the fact that Rabbi Paige Linsenberg did she's a person I worked with through the Jewish Psychedelic Summit, did a study on that the rabbis in the Talmud, or the commentary on the Torah, were arguing over the word or the blessing for mushrooms, that it wasn't the regular blessing for something that comes from the ground, but like it's the blessing for everything else, in Hebrew. So like what's that about, right? So there's a lot of kind of like things that point to the presence of psychedelic experience or substance, I guess you could say.
So yeah, the origins of the Hasidic movement in, you know, what is now the Ukraine, a lot of psychedelics, it seems, a lot of mysticism that fell out of. We're going to skip forward to your friends in the Poconos, but before we get there, that seemed to fall out of the Hasidic Jewish community. What happened with that?
Yeah, so I would say that a lot of the more mystical, weird, like trippy aspects of Judaism were really shoved under the rug, especially in Europe, because of anti-Semitism. And so, you know, you have two types of Judaism, so to speak, or technically three, but you have like Jews who are native to the Middle East or stayed in the Middle East, you know, from North Africa, you know, Palestine, whatever, you know, through Iran. And then the Jews who ended up in Europe. And so the ones who stayed in kind of Islamic territory, there's a lot of mysticism there, right? Like I think Jews and Muslims share the Khamsa, you know, the hand symbology. And so like there's a lot of mysticism that's okay, you know, in the culture, whereas in Europe, it wasn't to the same degree, I would say. Like those aspects of Judaism that were a little bit more Eastern, more Kabbalistic, more mystical, made the Jews stand out. And because of anti-Semitism, I've often said that like that kind of like de-psychedelicized Judaism. And so the idea was that these practices, there were Jew hunts and witch hunts. And I would argue that there's kind of history also that like a witch, you know, with the hooked nose and whatever, like is like this caricature of like a Jewish woman. And so basically the religion was like kind of like just made more academic, like less interesting, closer to the forms of Christianity that were that were more prevalent, just as a way of assimilating and also just safety.
Okay, so yeah, it became a lot about forms, a lot about rituals. The mysticism fell out in large part. That isn't speaking to a lot of younger Hasidic Jews at this point. And so they aren't integrating into the culture. They're tending to fall away, off the path. You write very passionately about a group up in the Poconos, as you call them, freedom-loving, fringe, holy rebels of Heimishness. Who are they, and tell us about them?
Yeah, so okay, so the word Heimish or Hamish is a Yiddish word for homie. If you pronounce it Hamish, you're probably coming from a more secular background. And again, it just means homey, homemade, like home style, you know. Heimish is more like the modern day Hungarian Yiddish pronunciation among Yiddish speakers, native Yiddish speakers, who are basically the only native Yiddish speakers left in the world, aside from people who are like in their 90s, are Orthodox Jews or Hasidic Jews who speak Yiddish as a first language, like growing up in Brooklyn, whatever places like that. And so there's, like I mentioned, you know, having, when I was in journalism school, meeting these kids who are coming from Williamsburg, It's just a Hasidic neighborhood in Brooklyn. Kind of OTD, doing psychedelics at festivals. I yeah, I got to know them. They started inviting me to their Shabbat dinners and their festivals and their ayahuasca ceremonies. And I forgot what the question was. Am I just elaborating on the sort of
Yeah,
holy
yeah,
rituals?
because we talked about the origins of Hasidic Judaism. We talked about that it became a lot of forms, a lot of traditions. They're losing a lot of the youth, and the youth are using psychedelics and
Yes.
reinventing.
So I've had the same, it's funny because like three people gave me the same exact quote, which is that I was kind of like unmoored by Jewish practice as I knew it. And then I did acid and I was like, oh, like that's what the Baal Shem Tov was talking about, right? And it was sort of like bringing life back to what it's about. Like the whole point of the Hasidic movement, the Baal Shem Tov, who's really like a leader for me, like a kind of a teacher for me as well, is that like, you know, there was this whole system where it's like you have to go to a rabbi and you have to study and blah blah blah, you have to do all the things, and that's how you're going to have a Jewish experience or a relationship with God. And the Baal Shem Tov was like go straight to God yourself. Like why do you need all this mediation? Like talk to God, right? Like and another Hasidic leader, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, Ukraine, was like really encouraged something called hitbodedut, which means kind of like, you know, it's translated as meditation, but it's really like just talking to God every day, like in nature. Just like it sounds like it's kind of the origins of talk therapy, honestly. You're just spilling out your heart. And so that's really the thing, is it's like, can you just like feel God like one-on-one, like by yourself, like without having to do something fancy or like learn in a religious day school, you know, all the time, or pouring over your studies? Like, can't you just be with God? And so that's really the whole point, you know, of what the Baal Shem Tov, the father of the Hasidic movement, was trying to get across. And then it's like, what are ways that you can really access that spirit? Like singing, clapping, dancing, like being merry, like getting into it, getting ecstatic, like ecstatic experience. And he really encouraged that. And as the Hasidim, the Hasidic Jews, especially in the original time, there was a lot of pushback to it because people, especially in northern parts of Europe, that, you know, it was more of kind of like in Lithuania, for example, they're called they're like they were like, this is weird, this isn't correct, you know, like this is not how you do it. And so there was tension within the Jewish world. But the point is that, you know, I'd say that like what I've observed is that people coming from Hasidic backgrounds who like know really what it's about, like they're well studied enough, they're better educated than anyone else in the Jewish world, right? This is the most intense form of religion. And now they're reigniting it with psychedelics, and I'd say also revolutionizing it. You know, they're praying in mixed gender environments, which is very revolutionary. They, you know, they're just owning it in a different way, in a way that really is like playing with and rectifying a lot of the trauma that comes with religious practice and inherited issues.
How's that being received in the broader Hasidic community?
Yeah, so you know, the mainstream Hasidic world, I wouldn't say is like so privy to what's going on, you know, like, but the thing is like we're talking about like they're basically like an anarchist zone. Like they don't have normal schools. Like they have their own ambulance, they have their own kosher food, they have their own, like it's not the real America. And for lack, just an autonomous zone, not anarchist, autonomous, or both. And so they also don't have dare, and they don't have the general like drug culture, or sorry, drug war culture. Like they don't have TV, right? So like they're not scared of psychedelic culture the way mainstream people might be, because they just haven't been programmed that way. And so what I'm seeing is, especially like now, as more mainstream high, you know, high high profile Hasidic people are dipping their toes into this, it's not coming with stigma. It's more coming with like, wow, I saw someone saved their marriage because they did DMT, you know, like this couple did DMT together and now they're not going to get divorced anymore. Or, you know, like stories like this where people are just seeing like a lot of healing. What's controversial about healing?
Right.
You know, it's, and again, it really depends how you use it. Like they're, you know, the people who are going to festivals, like they're probably like doing their own thing, like a little bit on the spectrum of OTD. But the people who are like doing like very intentional setting, you know, ceremonial, whatever, are like really in it because they just want to be like better people, better Jews, better parents, better spouses.
Right. So Divine Assembly, we have one tenet: every person can commune with the divine and receive direct guidance. So that's all about religious autonomy. It's pretty loose, but go seek the divine and get your guidance there. We can compare notes. We can help each other out. Vice TV was here just this weekend, spent the weekend with us, and a question they kept returning to is they would watch what we would do, the ceremonies. Like you say, a lot of integration, a lot of talk about healing, and they kept asking the question, is this religion? So your Hasidic friends up in the Poconos, is it religion?
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, what's religion, first of all? And I have my own definition for it,
I
which
was
is,
gonna ask you.
yeah, so okay, so there's like, let's take away or like not deal with right now like the mainstream definition of religion. But for me, what a religious practice is something that you do religiously, right? Like you are committed to it. It's bigger than you in a way, but it's also like keeps you in check. So like my dad, for instance, he does yoga religiously, like every Saturday, like every Sunday. Like he meditates every single day at 11 p.m. for at least 11 minutes in front of a picture of his guru. And he has like a whole little puja table, it's called, with all his, you know, little precious items. In Yiddish, we would call them tchotchkes. And that to me is that's religion, you know. Is it, what religion is it? It's not really any religion. It's informed by Hinduism, it's informed by Judaism, it's informed by a bunch of different things, but like it's doing something with consistency and with devotion. I think part of religion is this devotional aspect. Now, religion in general is sort of like also what brings it down. So, in, you know, you have like in like Judaism, you have like chesed, like loving kindness, kind of like just divine goodness on the right, and Gevurah on the left. Gevurah is like boundaries and rule, like strength and stuff like that. And so what you really need is the combination. Is like you need all this like loving kindness, God, mystical, whatever, and you need to bring it down into something that like has a real like discipline to it. And that to me is what religion is about.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk for a second about, let's talk about the Jewish Psychedelic Summit. I saw that and just thought it was so brilliant, saw an ad for it, and just stole it immediately and put together the Mormon Psychedelic Symposium. And we've had a lot of fun with that. We're in year 3, or we've done year 3. I guess this will be year 4, I think maybe. Why did you do this? What is the importance of the Jewish Psychedelic Summit?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things going on. Like, first of all, like it's happening anyways, right? Like we kind of just wanted to give like a container for and like a little bit of attention to a movement that's already in motion. But there's also a lot of Jews, a lot of people who, not just Jews, who don't know this is happening and like really might benefit from knowing, you know, or who were kind of lost and like on their own kind of individual lonely spiritual journeys not realizing like there's all this resource out, all of these resources out there, you know, that could help them connect with God, or help them acknowledge, you know, Jewish trauma, which, you know, people may not even realize they're dealing with. So there's a lot of different angles to it. You know, on the one hand, it was a very academic conference, right? Like what, you know, which entheogenic plants were in biblical times, or like where does mysticism come into Jewish experience and psychedelic experience, drug policy activism. And then the other parts were, you know, very experiential and practical, you know, Jewish shamanism. What does that look like? What does that feel like? Like, how do you actually experience this? Like, what does it mean to have a psychedelic Jewish experience? Like I said, like, what is psychedelic Judaism? Is Judaism psychedelic? Is religion psychedelic? All these questions that, you know, I think was really just about giving voice and shedding light on something that's already happening. And you know, I've been reporting on this for almost 10 years now. My colleagues, Natalie Ginsburg, she's, you know, passionate Jew, also has been working at MAPS, the largest psychedelic research nonprofit, for 7-8 years. And then Rabbi Zach was one of the rabbis in the Johns Hopkins study on religious professionals. And so what Johns Hopkins is doing is recruiting priests, rabbis, imams, you know, people who have no psychedelic experience, but who are, you know, leaders in their religious fields, and giving them psilocybin and seeing how their mystical experience matches up to reports of mysticism throughout history, or how, you know, how to define the psychedelic induced mystical experience, and like, how does that inform other research that's going on with psychedelics?
We had Johns Hopkins Professor Roland Griffiths on a Zoom last month, and yeah, he was very excited about that.
Yeah.
Okay, what is the importance of bearing witness in a religious culture? Bearing witness regarding psychedelics.
Like bearing witness to like the psychedelic experience.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed out of the Jewish Psychedelic Summit, people said it. I mean, there was a definite sense of, I didn't know there were so many of us. I didn't know that this was of interest to so many people.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the way I've learned religion is through observation, and maybe that's because I'm a journalist. But you know, what I do is I see the way someone else does it. I say, oh, that's a practice I like, or I definitely don't want to do it that way, you know, and like I get to sort of see like what form, what practice, what rituals make sense for me. And when you see that, including psychedelics or informed by psychedelics, inspired by, you know, that's important, because religion is not something that happens in a vacuum. And what I mean by that is, especially Judaism, and I would assume for a lot of religions, Mormonism included, is it requires a sense of community and collective experience. You go to temple, you go to synagogue, you go wherever, church, like you're not there alone. I mean, you can be there alone, I guess, but like services, rituals, holidays, bar mitzvahs, baptisms, whatever is like, that includes like a collective experience. And so everyone is witness to each other. And I think it's really about like finding your home in religious community. And we need witnesses, we need people, you know, coming out about their stories, because how else are people going to find each other? You know, like how else are you going to find your kindred spirits if they're not like, you know, flying their freak flag and, you know, doing it their way and finding people who are down to do it with them. So, and I would also really mark that as different from, in Judaism, the term would be kiruv, or like outreach, or kind of like missionary style, like getting people to, you know, do it because like you have a mission from your religious leaders, but it really just like doing it because this is what makes your heart sing and your soul sing. So that's there's yeah, I would say that's it. And I think also, yeah, maybe I'll leave it at that. I mean, the last thing I'll say is like, again, seeing people with like healed and positive relationships to religion, especially when religious trauma is so prevalent, can be really inspiring, and almost more important than like helping people find their spiritual path. Is like, you can't serve God if your body is sick, and your mind being your brain, your mind being part of your body. The Rambam says that. He's a famous Torah scholar, commentator, talked a lot about health, but really like that, like health is an undeniable human right. And if these practices are helping you be more healthy in something, then it's almost like you have a responsibility. It's like a service to let people know about it.
So you talked about singing your songs, singing our songs, and that's actually a huge theme with me. For the longest time in my life, I didn't want real me to be seen. I hid that and put up this persona. And it was very scary when I started to sing my song. No one will like this. It's dumb. I'm going to look stupid. You very much. And so I did start singing my song and was on a couple of podcasts and radio shows. And it's just amazing when people come up to me and they say, hey, I heard this and that changed my life. And that's like a superpower. I mean, it really just blows me away that words that fell out of this Texan's mouth impacted people to the point where they changed. Well, you are singing your song repeatedly in various publications, very excited about your book coming out. If you would be willing to get personal and sing your song, what would you say is your song about psychedelics and spirituality, and how has your song impacted others? So reach back, pat yourself on the back. No, if you would be willing to do that, this isn't braggadocio. I would love to know. So as an inspiration for others, what is your song and how is it impacting others?
Yeah. So I'll say that my song is sort of like, who are your musical inspirations, right? Taking the metaphor one step further. My two greatest teachers are Ram Dass and Rabbi Nachman. I'm like pronouncing it differently because I'm trying to make it more clear. Rabbi Nachman, Nachman. He's a Hasidic leader from Ukraine. And Ram Dass's whole thing is like, be here now, right? Like be in the present, zoom into the present. And Reb Nachman is the essence of what I've taken away from him is like, where do you find God? But mostly in like the deepest, lowest places is like where you have the greatest opportunity to connect with Hashem, to connect with God. I kind of see it as like, take it like you're like an archer, right? Like pulling the arrow back, like the furthest back it goes, like the more momentum it has to actually soar up into like the highest highs. So he said the greatest mitzvah or the greatest commandment, good deed, is to be happy. And so I've really like combined these songs from these leaders into my own song. And I would say that like, Ram Dass, he was a researcher at Harvard, and he must have done acid hundreds of times, and he kind of kept coming up and coming down, and he wanted to find a way to like sustain that without having to rely on acid. And so he ends up in India. He's with the Guru Maharaji, and that's the way he finds to like stay high, to stay lifted, to stay in touch with God, to stay in touch with the divine without having to always be tripping. And so my song isn't to like tell people not to do psychedelics. Like I still actively do them. I'm not doing them all the time, but like, and Ram Dass never officially stopped doing them either. So if you hear that he did, it's a myth. But what I want to get people in touch with, what my song is in touch with, is like, whatever it takes to like feel your soul, like that's where it's at, right? Like the more aligned with your soul that you are, just the more aligned with like God's will you are, because your soul is like your individual piece of the collective divinity. It's like a flame, right? Like fire is fire. You could have a massive fire, you could have a tiny candle. And that's what a soul is to me, is it's like that little candle that's part of like the greater fire. And psychedelics, I think, can really help people access their souls. Albert Hoffman, who was the scientist who was the first to synthesize LSD, referred to it as medicine for the soul. And so, you know, whether it's like a psychedelic experience, or whether it's meditation, or whether it's Shabbat dinner, or whether it's prayer, or whether it's a holiday, or a, you know, whatever, dancing, whatever it is like, whatever gets your soul lit is what it's about. And the thing is also, I would say that like, there's this term avodah zarah, or idolatry. And my issue and fear and concern sometimes is that people rely too heavily on the psychedelic, and they think it's about the psychedelic rather than where the psychedelic takes you. And that becomes idolatrous, right? It's like, it's not the method, it's the thing that the method gets you to. So like, I don't care how you get to the top of a mountain. You know, you can climb all the way up and do it the natural way. You can have a helicopter like drop you off at the top, right? Eventually you might come, you know, if you, in the to take the metaphor a little bit further, is like, if you climb all the way up and you don't have a helicopter, then once you're there and nothing's taking you down. But if you're taking the helicopter route, which would be the psychedelic drug route, it's probably going to have to like, you're going to have to leave with the helicopter when it comes back down. And so you really want to try to like integrate the lessons that you learn at the top of the mountain, and so that you can live a life every day that is infused by them, and not having to like rely on the psychedelic experience. Because again, it's not like, you know, people love to say, like, especially in like the ayahuasca world, they're like, ayahuasca is often used as like the metaphor for it is grandmother. And so they're like, grandma told me this, grandmother told me that. It's like, no, like it's not about that. It's about like, you're having this experience and you're getting like a message from something greater, the divine, and that's where the message is coming from. And so, you know, I don't know, I don't want to like ram that point in too harshly, but I just want to say like I guess like, have faith in yourself that you can do it. You can do it on your own, but that if you need inspiration or a lift or a little bit of a pick me up, or to get a glimpse of where you're going, the psychedelic is always helpful. Not always, sometimes helpful in the right set and setting, with the right intention and the right support. So that would be my song. I think that's a big lesson of my book. And also that religion, you know, if used correctly, if used in a healthy way, is can be psychedelic in and of itself. And that's really what I've experienced, thank God. And I only was able to realize that through the help of psychedelics, but now I don't need them as much to see that I can have a psychedelic experience with religious practice.
You're such a beautiful human, and that is such a beautiful song. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's just gorgeous. It is so fantastic when for a lot of us, we access the mystic through psychedelics, kind of a shortcut, such a direct path, and then we kind of learn what it feels like in there. And it gets really exciting when we start to become the medicine, as you've talked about a few times today, that for people who've joined us late, that now you use psychedelics sporadically when you feel you need to tap back in. But as you just said, to you, overuse is a form of idolatry, that it maybe diminishes us if we're relying on that crutch. I'm going to ask you to conclude with anything you want, but I would ask that you work in there just kind of a how-to. What is the process of becoming the medicine? How do we integrate? You've talked about this, that you had religious experiences, and now you don't need the substances to have those same religious experiences, because you know they're there. To me, you can define it differently. Please do. Don't let my definition control. But integration, to me, it is becoming the medicine. How do we do that? How do we integrate this into our lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about nervous system regulation, re-regulation. Becoming the medicine, it really just means embodying the medicine. And what does it mean to embody the medicine? Is like to get our bodies to act the way they're supposed to once we've had some medicine and we're feeling better, right? And so how can that, I mean, that's really what I mean by integration, regulation, is like if breathing the right way, like dancing. And again, it's funny because these like spiritual masters, you know, Reb Nachman, for instance, like he wrote a lot about dance and breath, which are like two big things for me, big chapters in my book, actually. And it's like you're feeling sad today, and he really struggled with depression, which is why he's kind of the Rebbe, the leader for a lot of wayward, fringy people. He's like, I don't care. He's like, get up and dance, you know, like you're feeling low and depressed, you don't want to get out of bed, like just get both your feet off the ground at the same time for like a second. And like you're literally like breaking the cords of depression. There's a really cool book called Anatomy of the Soul. And it's based on his teachings. And it's kind of like tells you how like each part of your body has like a more metaphysical component to it. And so like you do this with your legs and it means this, and you do this with your breath and it means that. And I won't get into the nitty gritty of it because it's going to be very esoteric, fascinating book. But I would say is like the embodied practice is like the body is really the temple for the soul. And so we're not anything without our health and without like, you know, just being, you know, without really just like taking care of like this gift that God gave us, which is a body, which is like a home for the soul on earth for however long we're here. And so that's what, you know, to me, it means to like integrate and embody the consciousness of the medicine is like when I see people who are like really into plant medicine, but like eating gross, junky food and lots, you know, and not really taking care of themselves. And like, this is not a plant medicine lifestyle. Like, this is like you run to ayahuasca like every couple of weeks. And in the meantime, you're just like you're not being medicine to yourself. That's why you need all this medicine. So it's like, you know, my dad smokes a lot of weed. He's like a kind of like a stoner dad, but he's not really into psychedelics. But anyways, he'll say the reason is he's like, people are like, no, but it's medicine. He's like, why do I need medicine? I'm fine. I'm healthy. I don't need medicine. And so it's, you know, it's just, it's a really interesting way to look at it is like, let's just like be as, you know, as healthy and good to ourselves as possible, because like once our bodies are in good shape, and I mean our bodies are mental, spiritual, emotional, physical health, then we can also do what we're put on earth to do, which is live out a purpose and like help other people or help the environment or serve God. And like, what is serving God without like really just like being here now, like right in front of you, and like waking up to the things around you and making them better for your children or the next generation or whatever it is. And so if there's any takeaway religiously, like the point of religion is just like how to be a good person, and how do you be a good person is just like just look outside yourself and do something nice for someone else. And that's like the most basic level, I guess I could say. Maharaji, the guru of my father, and Ram Dass would say, how do you serve God? Feed people. So, you know, Mother Teresa, you know, there's all sorts of different spiritual leaders who are like, rather than like sitting on their meditation pillows, like acting like all holier than thou, or just like the ones in the streets, you know, getting their hands dirty. And so that really to me is like the greatest expression of and manifestation of medicine consciousness.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Okay, one housekeeping thing, if you can go click on the panelist thing and kick hosting back to Sarah.
Yes.
If that's possible.
Where would I find it?
So click on participants, go up to the top, and then click on panelists and click on Sarah, kick it back over there if you can.
Okay, got it. Yes.
And a lot of people are wanting to know about your book. When does it come out? Where do they get it? And my question, I've already extended the invitation for you to come out to our summer solstice revival. You know, I want to plant that seed again as part of your book tour. Come out and hang out with us. You
Yeah.
today.
That would be really fun. So my book is not out yet. I just got, and first draft edits back from my editor. So second draft on the way. It'll be going to print, I guess, over the summer, out by this year, late this fall, or basically in the fall. But book tour, I think, starts like you said, in the summertime, pre-sales, whatever. So I just dropped both my email address in the chat if you have any questions for me, as well as you can get in touch with me through my website, madisonmargolin.com, and there's like a subscribe if you want to just like get on my eventual newsletter. Someone says it's not showing up.
It is, it's up there, Madison, 2 above that.
There you go. I put it again. Just, yeah. And yeah, I guess, God willing, I'll figure out my summer plans. But I told Steve before, I'm so enmeshed in the Jewish community, obviously being Jewish, but my stepmother actually comes from Salt Lake City. She comes from a Mormon background, so could be very cool to connect on that level.
Well, not that you need the help, but we would love to have you out, and we'll help you with those pre-sales.
Yeah.
People out here will just eat that up. So again, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time tonight and preparing for this. Godspeed to you, and please keep up the wonderful work. It means a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Really, really sweet to virtually meet everyone, even in their silent audience capacity. But thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.